Buenos días a todos. Good morning, everyone. We will start press conference now. If you have any questions, you can write them on the chat box or raise your hand in the Zoom link. Vamos a empezar con la primera. Veo la primera mano for Luis Guardiola, Telemundo. Go ahead, Luis. ¿Me escuchas, Luis?
Ahora, ¿me escuchan?
Sí, go ahead.
Two questions. One, and Mr. Mojica, I think the first time I've making a reference to the exit of the board. I know there's still a process that you have described here, which is a process which now acquires another dimension and moves on to another stage. Could you tell the people of Puerto Rico, according to this plan, when this board will cease?
Before, Promesa has requirements for the exit of the board in Section 209, right? 4 consecutive balanced budgets and access to the credit markets. And I think, as the governor pointed out, and we've pointed out, when we enacted the last budget, the one that we're currently in, and we said at that time, right, that could be the first of 4 consecutive balanced budgets. Access to the credit markets is also critical. And what we've said before is the first part was to stabilize the budget, get the budgets balanced, and then they've been balanced under cash. PROMESA requires them to be balanced under modified accrual. We hope that this one was balanced under modified accrual as well. And then you have to get 3 more budgets, and during that time, we should get access to the credit markets at the same time. So that is what we're working towards. That's why this presentation today was really important, to kind of show we need to transition the budget process. That's going to take time, but we need to transition it to from the board being the central driver to the government being the central driver, and the board moving more into a supervision role, and set up the accounts and the budget process so that you can regain access to the capital markets, which includes setting up a capital budget, having a capital plan, as the budget director mentioned, doing 5-year plans. These are all in our annual report, and we've published this before. We published it again this year. But the board this is the final stage. And while that's happening, we believe we'll finish with the PREPA Title III proceedings, and those will be the final stages. So it's been consistent. Maybe we haven't said it enough, but this is the final stage. And those are the final requirements, which are in law. So they're not new requirements. They're what in Section 209 of PROMESA.
Okay, so no se puede dar una fecha.
Bueno, le toca al gobierno.
And the governor, I think, is working very hard, and I believe she wants to have 4 consecutive balanced budgets in her term. We do need to have the audited financial statements done, because those certify that the budgets are actually balanced under modified accrual. But if we have 1 budget, we have 3 more, and then during that time, we expect that we would have access to the credit markets and all the other provisions done, and be done with PREPA.
Mi otra pregunta es,
The question is to all members of the board. Looking to the future, do you foresee the need for implementing needs for legal consequences in case that a government official deviates from fiscal discipline that's been implemented?
That hasn't been discussed. We haven't spoken about that at all. And look, fiscal discipline it's a complicated thing, right? To talk about what fiscal discipline actually is. The same challenges that Puerto Rico faces are challenges that other states face during times of fiscal crisis, and there are choices. Those are not criminal matters, and those are not. These are matters of fiscal responsibility, and what happens is what happened in 2016. So what we're trying to do is put safeguards in place so that there are guardrails to prevent these kinds of things to happening, and that people know when they're happening, so you don't have 16 consecutive years of unbalanced budgets. But there's never been a discussion about, putting specific sanctions in place.
Muchas gracias.
Gracias.
Continuamos. Para que sepan el orden, vamos.
Thank you very much. And we continue with Guillama, Alex, and then Kateria, and then Will Neris. Manuel from Nuevo Dia, go ahead.
Greetings. Mr. Mojica, you and the governor also mentioned on several occasions, you made reference to the new Fortress Energy contract recently approved. What safeguards exist from the Fiscal Oversight Board's perspective to guarantee the supply of fuel and to guarantee that the power generating plants, in case in the next few months or weeks, they're declared insolvent? Hay una disposición en el contrato.
It included, and the board wanted included in the contract, that says that in the event that New Fortress can't supply fuel, they have to enter into an agreement for someone else to supply fuel. We thought that was critically important because New Fortress has control of the port. And in the absence of terminating that contract, if they can't supply, no one else would have access. And this is not something that we're speculating on. It has happened. So what was required in the contract, the board required it, and the government required it as well, is that in the event that they cannot provide, the government will have the ability to bring someone else in. And in that contract, there's a tolling agreement, there's provisions in the contract that outline how another supplier would be able to do this. Now, this requires New Fortress to act in good faith in the event that this happens, because what it requires is for them to enter into an agreement. What the contract has is the outlines of what that agreement are and what those terms should be, but it will require New Fortress to act in reasonably. And if they don't, then the government will be able to enforce those provisions and they won't be in compliance with the contract. And again, that we think that's the best that we could do when you consider that New Fortress has control over the port on a long-term lease.
La otra parte de la pregunta era con relación a las plantas generatrices que
Part of the question has to do with the power generating plants, which allows for the automatic cancellation in case of bankruptcy, and also in the case of the gas supply. Are those provisions in case of non-compliance by New Fortress? Do you believe that they are a long-term solution in case New Fortress is unable to provide gas for long periods of time? Or is it function mostly to ensure supply for short periods?
In short term, and it was our understanding during the discussions with P3 that they would start to speak to alternative providers to get those kinds of agreements in place so that there wouldn't be a big gap, whether it be short term or whether it would be long term. And we do believe that these provisions, even if New Fortress had financial difficulty and the bankruptcy courts, it would be subject to the bankruptcy court, but those provisions would survive and they would be able to prepare a tolling agreement and deliver even in the event that they entered into either bankruptcy proceedings or some other proceedings. We don't know. We haven't had those specific discussions with them. We read about their financial condition, from what we hear in the press.
Muchas gracias.
What about the generation fleet, the Genera generation fleet? What are the contingencies in that regard?
In terms of what with regard to the generation fleet?
El contrato de Genera no dispone que se puede cancelar.
Contract generate says it can be canceled if New Fortress goes into bankruptcy. What plan would there be in order to ensure power generation if that were to occur?
And Genera right now is the operator of the generation fleets. So if the question is if New Fortress is in bankruptcy, would the Herneta contract would continue, and the same thing, they would still continue to operate those and be subject to bankruptcy proceedings. No one is, again, we have not crossed that bridge, but that contract continues even in the bankruptcy. I don't know if the judge has any thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it depends on what happens in terms of what kind of bankruptcy may be filed. And if it's a restructuring of New Fortress, and New Fortress is going to operate during the bankruptcy, that's one thing. If it were to be, and I have no reason to believe it would be, a liquidation of New Fortress, then clearly they wouldn't be operating their contracts. But I think it's far afield right now to speculate at what it may look like at that moment in time if it ever were to happen.
Okay.
But certainly I think all parties will, prepare themselves as best they can to address the issue if it were to occur.
Thank you, Judge. Vamos a pasar por la próxima pregunta.
Alex?
Cyber News.
Estoy aquí, voy a ver. Sí, le voy a hacer la
I'm going to be asking questions, consecutive questions. The first one is, you were talking about the issue of the contracts and how the board and the board's intervention has helped to avoid probable subcontracting problems. What do you think of the fact, for example, that the government of Puerto Rico signs a contract, in this case with Luma Energy, and at the same time goes to court to challenge its own contract and declare a cause unconstitutional? Does that help in the process of doing business in Puerto Rico? Second question is, can you explain how the budget issue is going to change in the Department of Education? You said it's going to be done through budgeting for student expenses by student versus how it is now. And finally, the third question, is there any administrative issue that you consider important to resolve prior to concluding this fiscal year? Okay.
In the reform, in terms of, and I'm speaking as a commissioner of the state of New York, the important thing is to focus on the individual student's needs. And obviously, every student's need, cada estudiante tiene necesidades.
Every student has a different need, and so we need to get ready in order to create programs and invest for those students, specifically when we're dealing with students who have special education needs and others. So it is extremely important that this it's a reflection upon the needs of the schools, but more specifically, the students' needs.
Look at student base and then do the modeling of the various needs based on those needs.
And part of what we found
Lo que nosotros allá
was initiated is there was a big disparity between schools. And some schools received a lot more funding than other schools, more for historical reasons than because of the needs of the school. And as student population has changed, some of these budgets haven't changed. And the proper way to do student budgeting would be to have money based on, as Commissioner mentioned, money based on what the students' needs are, so that there is fairness and equity in the funding formulas, and frankly, transparency. Because when asked, why does this school have 50 students and they receive 50% more funding than this other school with 50 students, there really isn't an answer except it's because we've always done it that way. That's part of that reform.
Yeah, and Robert, the other part that I think is very intentional and very focused is the the issue of weighted, based on those needs. That's exactly what I look at per school, per district, versus, just looking at, a general number of students that are in that space. Because you may have general numbers, but the individual needs in those spaces, in those schools, in the district are very different.
So, and it doesn't, and just to be clear, it's not, the whole budget is not decided in that way. A portion of it. And these things happen over time, and you look at a portion of the budget and say, this is the base amount. Base amount should follow the student. Obviously, there are other considerations. How much is the school upkeep cost? How much is the building cost? Those are other factors that you have to consider. So it's complicated and it'll take time, but you have to start. And that's the process that we want to work with PRD, and hopefully we get to a point where there's something that you could execute on. On the issue of the Luma contract, when we review the contracts, we're looking for whether it promotes market competition and whether it's consistent with the fiscal plan. So the issue with regard to liability at the time we were reviewing it did not violate the fiscal plan, and I don't believe it weighed in as to whether or not there was market competition with regard to that clause. So the board wasn't discussed with the board when that lawsuit was initiated, nor how it proceeded. So right now, I think PREB is reviewing it. There are appeals that could take place. So that's where that stands. But it wasn't something that the board would have accepted or rejected, because it wasn't an issue of consistency with the fiscal plan or market competition. And with the third question?
Can you repeat it, Alex? ¿Lo puedes repetir?
La pregunta que queda pendiente, si en lo que queda
Pending is whether in the remainder of the year there's any administrative issues that consider important to take care of.
This year? Or are you talking about long term?
In what's remaining of 2025.
Very close to the end of we're very close to the end of the year. We're still reviewing, we're reviewing contracts. We're working on the administrating of the budget. There are always things that come up, but there's nothing specifically that we are talking about getting done before the end of the fiscal year. The legislature's not in session, so just the general administration of the budget, approving of contracts, and just keeping government running, working with the government.
Gracias, Robert. Continuamos. We continue with Katirias.
Thank you, Robert. We continue with Katiria.
Estás en mute.
Hola, buenos días. Ahora sí. Hola.
Hello and good morning. I am Katiria from Noticentro. I would like to know, how open is the board to discuss a tax reform, and what are the limits? What areas could or not be dealt with?
The board hasn't put a restriction on what you can and can't do. It has to be consistent with the fiscal plan. I think the budget director earlier mentioned the issue of budget neutrality, of being fiscally responsible. We're speaking with the government, and we hope to be able to, work with them, see a plan, and be able to work cooperatively with them on whatever they want to advance.
Más temprano en la conferencia.
Earlier this morning in the conference, you talked about the calculation that you came up with each dollar that was invested on the board, that the country has saved $38, and the $60,000 per household. How did you reach that number? Let's explain.
The debt, all right? So a big part of that number is the reduction in the overall debt. And all of this is in the annual report that we released last month in detail. So it is the amount of money that was decreased, that the debt was reduced, the amount of debt service that was reduced, the amount of spending that we did not approve and that was going to be approved, number of households, divided by the number of households, is how we got to those numbers. But you can look in the annual report and we can get it to you, and it's very clear as to how we got to those numbers based on the overall amount that the board has spent.
Y ya para terminar.
And just to finish, how do you foresee the legal battle that is ensuing with the U.S. government, where the president is trying to validate the dismissals from the board? How will this legal process impact the negotiation of the PREPA debt and the process in the bankruptcy court?
Josh, you want to answer that?
It's unclear as to what its impact would be. Obviously, it happened. People are aware of it, and they will react to it. But exactly how it impacts negotiations to go on in the future, resolutions of any kind, it's very hard to predict.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Josh. Continuamos con...
And now we move on with El Vocero, Marielis. Hello, I'm Wilmaris Agosto from El Vocero. I have a few questions, and I'm going to ask them at once. Since you started talking about Trump's dismissals, that's one of my questions. I want to know what the opinion is of the members of the board when Trump challenged this appeal in court, and what initiatives of economic development are you contemplating so that Puerto Rico will be less dependent on federal funds? And thirdly, in terms of the bankruptcy of PREPA, what is the board doing to expedite this bankruptcy? How much longer do we have to wait? Because we infer that this process is delayed.
So on the issue of federal fund reduction, these are speculative. And last year we thought some would happen, they didn't happen. The government's working on the next budget, so we have to be mindful of that. We've built budgets that are responsible, and we can manage through most things. And the example was last year, or a couple months ago, we were dealing with reductions potentially in the bond program, right? And we had built some safeguards in the budget to be able to manage it temporarily. The biggest funding reduction that the Puerto Rico will face is the potential Medicaid reduction, because we know that expires. What we don't know is what will take its place. Will it be the exact same number or some reduced amount? What we do to mitigate against that is control costs, build reserves. We even built a very small Medicaid reserve last year. We probably need to build more. And all you can do for those things is build a transition in the event that there's reductions, and then you'll have to reevaluate and what you do with the budget. Revenues are currently strong, which if we don't spend that money, gives us a buffer to be able to manage these. And that's what good fiscal management is being able, not spending every dollar, so when a crisis happens, then you have to go back, cut funds, cut programs. We have the ability to manage through some of these, at least on a temporary basis, so the government can be thoughtful with the legislature about how you deal with those things long term. That's why we raise the issue of the Medicaid cliff now, because we know that it's coming in a year and a half. And the first step is work with the government in Washington to make sure that the decision makers understand what the implications are for the people of Puerto Rico, so that they can act with that knowledge. And then in the event that it impacts us in a negative way, we'll have to manage that. But that also goes to why you want to control spending, don't do irresponsible budget increases, make sure you have revenues that can take the place of some of the federal funds if they go away. So it is all part of the responsible budgeting, and we're working very closely with the administration, and they understand it. I think you heard the budget director actually say today, right? They're looking at the risks and trying to manage the budget, keeping an eye towards those risks, and I think that's a very good development and something that Puerto Rico has not done in the past.
Hey, Robert, can I just add to that? I've been through many of these cycles throughout my time in government, as has Robert and others. But it's so important to understand that Puerto Rico, the finances of Puerto Rico now are operating in a rational way, right? I mean, that's why we build up budget stabilization funds. We have reserves. It's not perfect at this point, but we're much better equipped to deal with economic cycles and federal funding changes than the Commonwealth has traditionally been. So this is not uncommon to what's happening in all other 50 states and the other territories. And it's important that we continue this path, because right now the board's in place and we're watching these, we're forecasting them, we're looking at them, we're working with the federal government. But at the end of the day, this stuff needs to be sustainable for Puerto Rico to be able to continue long term and have success long term. So these are exactly why we need to do what we're doing and what we've been working on.
Thank you, John.
I guess to address the first and the third question, as to how each of us feel, my reaction would be the answer may be interesting, but it's not really relevant to the outcome. And what I think we will focus on through our attorneys is responding to the court as they will and have required responses to be filed, and address it really within the court process.
Thank you, Judge.
As to the third issue about moving forward with the PREPA case, I think it was mentioned earlier that the administrative claim dispute, which is a significant dispute in the case, is moving forward. There was a recent order by the court regarding discovery, and at the same time, the mediation process continues. And I would assume that both that posture of the administrative claims and other issues within the court will move forward as the mediation process also moves, hopefully, to an agreed resolution.
Okay. Gracias. Continuamos con...
Moving on with Oscar Serrano from Noticel.
Y feliz Navidad a todos.
Gracias.
Mi pregunta tiene que ver con el contrato de New Fortress. Las aprobaciones que se dieron de parte de la Junta incluyen la expectativa, the expectation, de que el gobierno va a evaluar el acuerdo de los muelles para desarrollar alternativas a ese acuerdo de los muelles con New Fortress, para poder tener más competencia en el suplido de gas. La pregunta concreta sobre eso es qué facultades legales, qué poderes de la Junta ustedes podrían desplegar para atender esa evaluación que haga el gobierno, o si es simplemente que a ustedes se les va a informar, porque no hay nada que puedan hacer.
At this point, there's a legal contract that exists between the ports and NFE. And there's been nothing provided to the board that suggests that that contract is not enforceable. There is a provision in that contract that's clear that says that if for economic development reasons, Puerto Rico has an ability to make changes to the contract. And I don't know the exact clauses. I can send them to you. But there's also things that have to do. You have to provide alternative access. You'd have to compensate them for it. And what we're saying in there is the government should review that contract and those clauses because this is a 7-year contract with a potential for renewal, and anything can happen during that time. And they should be aware of all of their legal powers under that contract to make changes if that changes are necessary. Someone else, asked the question about the fiscal stability of the fuel supplier. Right? Anything could happen. So what we don't want to do is be in the exact same position 7 years from now with few alternatives. So this is where we are today, and that contract's in place. But we think the government should start to look at those things. Otherwise, you're having the same conversation 7 years from now. Now, perhaps the markets have changed. Things have changed between now and then. But that was the purpose of that clause, because the board was really restricted in terms of how you can create market competition for the port with that clause there, because even other suppliers, right, were restricted. A victory in that contract was actually getting the tolling agreement, however, and putting that in place for in the event there is an inability. But that was the purpose of that clause. The government negotiates contract. The government enters into the contracts. So we are not, part of that negotiation process. We review the contracts after the fact, but before they're executed, right, to make sure. And the reason we got stuck on this contract is because it did trigger one of our review thresholds, which is, does it promote market competition? And then after evaluating the contract over time and exhaustively, that port issue, right, became the biggest obstacle. And that's why that clause is in there. We really want them to review it, see what all their options are, to promote as much competition as possible, to reduce costs. At the end of the day, that's the goal. The goal at the end of the day is to get the lowest price for the LNG as possible under market conditions.
Seguimiento breve. Respetuosamente, creo que no me has contestado la pregunta porque la misma.
You haven't answered the question. These issues that legal factors can be exercised in that contract. The board pointed out that original port contract was not submitted to the board for review because at the time it was done, New Fortress didn't exist. And at some point you also requested information regarding the contract. Have you already concluded that under your powers you cannot enter into that contract, or do you believe that still under your powers you can enter into that contract?
I think the issue was that the contract was not submitted to our approval, and then upon review, the information was sent to us. The contract is not over $10 million, so it wasn't subject to the contract review process at the time. So to then say 7-8 years later that we're going to open up the contract because we wanted to review it, even though at the time it wasn't at the $10 million threshold, and today when we reviewed it again, it's still not at the $10 million threshold, right? There wasn't a basis for us to review that contract or for the government to have sent it to us. I believe that was the determination that we made with regard to reviewing that contract recently in the last 6 months.
¿Alguna otra pregunta? Continuamos con reorg.
Any other question? We continue with Jan Marino up.
The White House can make three more, the three vacancies of the members who didn't sue. The White House can make those nominations. I'm just wondering if the White House has done that. And if not, if the board cares to comment on the 6-month lapse in time between the dismissals and the firings. And also, if you could discuss maybe the chairman, member Nixon or Mojica, about how the uncertainty over board membership is affecting the board's work or PREPA restructuring strategy.
Go through let me answer the questions. At my age,
sure.
I forget things. So go through the questions one at a time.
Yeah, it's our understanding that the president can make three nominations to the board for the members he terminated who were not involved in the litigation challenging those terminations. Just wondering if the White House has informed the board about its plans in that regard. And if not, if you care to comment in the lapse of, it's like 6 months since the firings.
All right. With respect to the first question, the first part of the question, the answer is no. With respect to the second part, it's also no. No, we haven't heard it. To my knowledge, there's no communication we've heard about it. And secondarily, I don't think it's appropriate for us to comment on it, at least from my perspective.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to add a couple of things. I mean, obviously, there's been a cycle here that we've gone through. And I just want, you asked, how's it impacting the board's work? I mean, I think it's important to note that we've done everything we can to keep the work of Puerto Rico moving forward. Clearly, while I was acting alone for a couple of months, we were able to do that. There are certain things that we can't do. I think you're aware of all of that. But we are moving forward and we're doing the people's work here in Puerto Rico. Now that we have 4 members, we can certify budgets and do those things. So clearly, I don't view, this is my personal view, we're not operating in crisis mode while they sort things out. It's important to note that we are intact. We always have been intact, even as a quote single board member, or when I was acting alone, we were operating within the law, and we kept the work going forward. Has it been a disruption? Obviously, it would be optimal to have a full board because obviously we're a non-paid part-time board, and so it does put quite a bit of pressure on us who are here trying to do the work. But at the end of the day, we are moving the people's work forward, and I wouldn't take a belief at all that we're not making sure that things are happening. So.
Okay, thanks. Just a quick follow-up. With the 4 members, can you do everything you need to do regarding the PREPA restructuring?
Regarding the PREPA restructuring?
Yeah, is there anything the board can't do with 4 members?
I do not believe so. Regarding there are some minor exceptions outside of the Title III issues. That you would need more than 4 members for, but they're not relevant to the PREPA, as far as I understand. So I would think not.
Okay.
Well, thank you. If there's no more questions, we conclude this press conference. Muchas gracias a todos.
Gracias.